The nuclear ambitions of North Korea. President Trump says he'll confront them with or without the help of the Chinese. And inside the country, what lies behind the secrets and lies? A reality check on life in the DPRK. I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. US President Donald Trump has declared he would be willing to go it alone to restrain North Korea's nuclear weapons program, with or without China's help, telling the Financial Times newspaper, if Beijing is not going to solve North Korea, we will. Mr. Trump was speaking ahead of a scheduled visit from Chinese President Xi Jinping to Florida later this week. North Korea's nuclear program remains a source of deep concerns for the international community. Despite multiple efforts to curtail it, Pyongyang says it has already conducted 5 nuclear tests and is developing the missiles that one day might carry a nuclear payload. Insight senior correspondent Dana Lewis tells us more.
More missiles launched. Another rocket engine test fired. 5 nuclear tests have been carried out by North Korea. Nuclear warheads have been miniaturized for longer range strikes. Nuclear yields have been increased. North Korea's bombs are said to be more powerful than those which hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II. But here's where it gets nerve-rattling serious. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, and his nuclear forces are now practicing for launching nuclear war.
Do the experts contemplate that he would actually, the leadership of North Korea, carry out a first strike?
North Korea has moved to develop mobile systems which can increase the survivability of its arsenal exactly because it anticipates that the US could strike first if it feels threatened. What has changed is that North Korea is also operating on a first strike capability.
March 6th. North Korea launches 4 missiles, and the trajectory and distance are all noteworthy. The missiles traveled about 1,000 kilometers, landing in the Sea of Japan. Targets of those missiles would include Iwakuni, the Japanese airbase where America launched its F-35 aircraft as part of its latest joint military exercise with South Korea. Altogether, 54,000 U.S. forces are stationed in Japan, scattered across 7 bases. Last year, North Korea tested a no-dong missile and published a map showing the missile was fired to a point in the sea the exact range as South Korea's port city of Busan. North Korea stated the simulation was to make preemptive strikes at ports and airfields in South Korea. Are they planning for first strike?
They seem to be. All the evidence is pointing that way, and it comes from the very top. When they are playing that card, it's particularly dangerous because they are so unpredictable.
What's the thinking of a first strike?
Their thinking is power, it is glory, it is a very narcissistic view of the world. I can rearrange the world of fact according to my beliefs. And they are aiming at 2 things, primarily South Korea and, of course, giving America a bloody nose.
A recent missile test failed, exploding seconds after launch. But however crude some of it appears, North Korea is advancing, say experts, in its quest for an ICBM capable of striking the U.S. President Obama pursued diplomacy, sanctions, and covert disruption of North Korea.
He's acting very, very badly. I will tell you, he's acting very badly.
Now, while President Trump tweets his frustrations with China, America's new Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has said strategic patience with Kim is over. He is pressing China for help and has said that the U.S. would consider a preemptive strike.
If they elevate the threat of their weapons program to a level that we believe requires action, that option is on the table.
The U.S. has stepped up military exercises in Japan and South Korea. American bombers routinely sweep over South Korea. It's now installing THAAD missile interceptors in South Korea. But none of the options on the table are good ones.
We find ourselves staring down the barrel of a North Korean ICBM. We have an obligation to the American people to challenge existing assumptions and explore policy alternatives.
But to quote Senator Corker, America has been, quote, staring down the barrel of an ICBM for decades when it comes to Russia and China. But the deterrent of mutually assured destruction doesn't seem to work with North Korea.
It puts America in a very difficult position because not only do they have to provide assurances to East Asian allies that it can protect them, it now also needs to protect its own homeland against North Korean nuclear threats. We've already seen America step up its defenses in the region, and questions will now emerge. What should they do to further step up their defenses to the U.S. homeland?
So all of this may come down to the leader of North Korea and also the U.S. showing restraint as this escalates. But Kim and Trump, analysts are not hopeful that either leader can be counted on to pull back from the brink in time of crisis.
Kim's latest propaganda video shows the usual fiery attack on America. Target, a U.S. aircraft carrier. America is on a hair trigger because the next missile the North Koreans roll out onto a launch pad could be one that could reach Washington. I'm Dana Lewis, reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Ramon Pacheco Pardo. He's a senior lecturer in international relations at King's College in London. We'll come out to the purpose of this weaponry in a minute. Let's just examine the science. They've got the scientists, have they, to build a successful nuclear weapon?
Yes, they do have the scientists, and they have been working on this for 20, 30, 40 years, so they do have the capability and the expertise to do so.
And what about the raw ingredients? What about the chemicals you need?
They do have them, so they do have facilities to produce highly enriched uranium that can actually be used for these nuclear weapons. So they do have the raw materials. They don't need to purchase them from overseas anymore.
The usual route to weaponized uranium or plutonium is through domestic power stations. Is that the route they're taking?
Yes, they have taken this route. They have been working on it for at least 20 years, if not longer. So they do have the nuclear facilities. We know where they are, but it is very difficult, obviously, to launch a first strike, as we saw previously.
Would that be a possible target if America did decide to take that dramatic step?
It would be probably the first target. It would have to be the first target. But as many experts have mentioned in the past, and many analysts in East Asia, in the US, etc., have said this would mean war in the Korean Peninsula. So it is very difficult to actually go down the path.
If North Korea, and the thinking is correct, that they intend to launch a first strike, who would it be against, do you believe?
Well, they have Seoul, which is only...
South Korea.
South Korea, absolutely.
Their sworn enemy. That's
yes.
The most likely target, do you think?
In my view, it would be, because you have 10 million people only in Seoul proper, 20, 30 million people if you count the surrounding areas, plus you have around 40,000 American troops. So it would be very easy to target them and to strike them and to basically cause mass casualties. So I think that would be the first target.
Do they have the missile technology to carry the nuclear payload from North Korea to a target like South Korea? Relatively short journey, I appreciate.
In this case, yes, because as you say, it's a very short journey. We're talking only about a few dozens of miles. Yeah. So in a sense, it wouldn't take much technology, very advanced technology, to hit Seoul. The US obviously is a completely different matter, but Seoul, there will be no problems.
The anti-missile technology that the Americans are helping the South Koreans put in place, would that necessarily work? Would that provide the shield?
It would help, but it wouldn't shield South Korea completely from a strike from North Korea. It would help, for example, in the sense that South Korea, the US, would know when North Korea is about to launch to a strike, and it would also help in the sense that some of the missiles could be stopped, but not all of them.
How would we know when they're about to do it? What would you expect the play out to be of the alarm bells signing and the warning signs that we would get?
Well, first of all, it has to be made clear that obviously both South Korea and the US, plus Japan probably as well, they do have intelligence. They know what North Korean actions might be. They don't know for sure, but they know the direction of travel. Now, whenever there has been, for example, a nuclear test, before the nuclear test, there were signs. there were signs and there was discussion within the South Korean government, along with the US, about the possibility of this test. So we can assume that they actually know when this might happen.
So despite being a secretive regime, North Korea leaks, does it? There are ways for the South Koreans, the Americans, the rest of the world to find out what's going on?
Especially for the South Koreans. For obvious reasons, they used to be a unified country, speak the same language, etc., etc. Having said that, it is much more secretive and much more difficult to penetrate, according to American officials, than any other regime they have been working in. Even the Soviet Union, it was easier for them to penetrate because it's a much bigger country. But there are some links. There are refugees, for example, as well, live in the country, high-profile refugees that have escaped the country over the past 2-3 years. So there are some leaks, there is some information, and we can know the direction of travel, not exactly what is going to happen the next, let's say, week or 2 weeks.
It's difficult to separate the propaganda from the fact, isn't it, here? But there is literature around now which suggests that North Korea may have missile technology which can go a lot further. So you're thinking about mainland China, bits of Russia, perhaps the mainland of India, and even, on one projection I've read, into Alaska. So that's figuratively into the United States. Do you think that's true, and do you think they would try a target like that first?
I think it is true insofar they have been testing the technology for decades now. So even though they might not have the technology that is as precise as US technology, for example, or even Chinese technology, they can try to strike a region that is far away, and if they don't strike the precise target, at least the region will be. And this is where Alaska comes into the picture, right? Because Alaska is a very big territory, and they might target the capital of Alaska, Anchorage. They might not hit the capital of Alaska, but they will hit Alaska. And this is the working assumption that you see from officials in the region and officials in the US as well.
Try and get us inside the head of the King family, then. Do they do this as a random act of violence? Is it in response to a direct provocation? What do you think is likely to happen here? How great is the threat of a first strike out of North Korea?
Well, North Korea knows that a first strike means the end of the North Korean regime. It will take days, maybe weeks. South Korea will suffer mass casualties. The US will suffer as well. But they know it is the end of the regime. And this is, in my view, why they have never actually launched a first strike.
Well, right? They do understand that. The retaliation would be so swift and so immense, their country would, in all intents and purposes, disappear.
I think so, because South Korea, the US, and Japan actually have made a clear threat. If North Korea launches a first strike, we'll have nothing to lose, obviously, so that will be the end of the North Korean regime. So I think they do understand that. And I think if they didn't understand this, they might have already tried to test the waters, maybe with a strike somewhere in the Korean Peninsula, or maybe in Japan.
And to what extent do you think President Trump coming into office has changed the dynamic here? He came in with, as we heard, a much more belligerent attitude to North Korea. Even over the weekend, he's told a British newspaper, I'll sort them out with or without Chinese help. Do you think he means that?
I think it changes the picture insofar Obama for 8 years tried the strategic patience, and this didn't work. North Korea now has a more developed nuclear technology, has conducted more nuclear tests, so he didn't stop the North Korean nuclear program or the missile program for that matter. I think what changes with Donald Trump is that he has shown his willingness openly to launch a strike on North Korea. Now, the Bush administration did the same over the first couple of years. We didn't go down that route. There were discussions and negotiations afterwards. And I think North Korea is probably thinking, well, we have seen this threat before. We don't know if they will follow on the threat, but we have to take this into consideration, that this is a new administration that might think differently, for example, about what's going on in the region, in East Asia, not only North Korea.
Ramon, stay with us. You're watching Insight. Coming up next, away from the expense of the nuclear weapons program, we look at the relative poverty of ordinary citizens of North Korea.